When Rebecca Chang is blindsided and publicly fired by the very company she helped conquer Asia, she doesn't just walk away, she pivots into a game of corporate revenge, global strategy, and calculated resilience. What begins as humiliation in a Shanghai boardroom explodes into a high-stakes battle across continents, where power isn't taken, it's architected. And Rebecca? She was always the architect. Rebecca Chang adjusted the cuff of her navy blazer, her fingers trembling slightly as she stepped into the glass conference room of OrbisTech's Shanghai office. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of a city humming with energy, but her gaze never left the lacquered table where 12 executives from Zoo International sat, still and expectant, 1,000 thoughts fired in her head. But her voice, when she finally spoke, was calm and razor-sharp. "We appreciate you hosting us," she said in flawless Mandarin, bowing slightly deeper than etiquette required. It was a signal. She understood their culture not superficially, but in the narrow, deep way that earned trust over time. Zoo COO, Mr. Liang, responded with a nod so subtle it could be mistaken for nothing at all. Rebecca had learned to read these gestures. During her 11 months navigating this deal, a $180 million AI and logistics integration contract that would define OrbisTech's expansion across Asia, the door opened. Connor Baines burst in 15 minutes late, reeking of Palo Alto arrogance and sandalwood cologne. He grinned like a man who thought confidence could substitute for competence. "Hope I didn't miss the party," he joked. Mr. Liang didn't look up. Rebecca didn't flinch, but her grip on her pen tightened. Connor plopped into the seat beside her, his legs splayed like he owned the room. "Let's circle back to that autonomy clause," he said loudly, in English, slicing through the delicate atmosphere like a chainsaw. "I believe we were making progress," Rebecca said, shifting back to Mandarin. Connor laughed. "Becca, you've done great as our cultural liaison or whatever, but this is a strategy." "My lane." The pen snapped in her hand. She didn't speak, just looked across the table, locking eyes with Mr. Liang. She said, "Let me briefly explain the context." A few of the zoo executives relaxed visibly. One even smiled. Rebecca pressed forward. She knew how to let silence speak for her, knew how to bow without kneeling, knew how to make herself heard without shouting. But Connor didn't know when to shut up. As they reviewed the amended integration clause, her clause, Connor interrupted again. "Rebecca won't be continuing with OrbisTech," he said. "Effective." Immediately, the room froze. No one moved. Not even Mr. Liang, who paused mid-pour with his teapot hovering in the air. Rebecca's ears rang, but she didn't react, didn't even blink. She simply stood. "Step outside with me," she said. Connor chuckled. "No need. Transparency's better. No secrets, right?" That's when she knew he'd planned this. Waited for the perfect moment, her moment to execute his stunt. But something shifted in that moment. Mr. Liang's eyes were on her, not with pity, but interest. "Apologies," Rebecca said in Mandarin. "This was unexpected. I understand this may be concerning, Mr. Liang nodded slowly. Connor beamed, clueless. "What's your next role?" Mr. Liang asked her in Mandarin. "I haven't decided yet," she replied, "but I'm open to new partnerships." Connor tried to jump back in. "Let's not lose momentum." "Break," Liang said. One word. The room cleared. Rebecca stood, slowly, gathering her folder. She hadn't told anyone, not legal, not her assistant, not even her sister, but she'd been preparing to leave OrbisTech for weeks. A whisper from a contact at Jew, an exploratory call. She hadn't answered then. Now she had. "You should have seen this coming," Connor whispered as they stepped into the hallway. "You were overhyped, overpaid." She turned to him, her voice ice. "You just fired your only translator, your cultural bridge, the architect of this entire deal." He smirked. "Enjoy job hunting." "I already got an offer," she said. 3 weeks ago. I turned it down." She leaned in. "I think I'll accept it now." Inside, Mr. Liang returned alone. "Would you be willing to continue the discussion independently?" he asked. Rebecca didn't miss a beat. "I'd be delighted, then I would appreciate," he said in Mandarin, "if OrbisTech's representatives could give us the room." It wasn't a request. Connor hesitated, then backed out. The moment the door clicked shut, Rebecca reached into her folder, pulled out a clean sheet of paper, no OrbisTech logo, no watermark, and slid it across the table. I'm now operating as an independent consultant, she said. The terms remain. My compensation will shift to a success-based model. 10% payable upon contract execution, Mr. Lean's mouth twitched. You already had this ready. I've been prepared. They talked for over an hour. Talked about cultural philosophy, about logistics, about trust. By the time the zoo team returned, Rebecca had already restructured the deal. And when Mr. Liang shook her hand and said, "This is how business is meant to be done," it wasn't just a contract. It was a declaration of war. The sleek glass towers of Singapore's Marina Bay shimmered under the late afternoon sun as Rebecca stepped out of the silver Audi and adjusted her scarf. She had landed just 5 hours ago, but she wasn't here to rest. This wasn't a business trip, it was a power move. Her new title, Independent Strategic Advisor. Her client? Technically, no one. Not yet. But if tonight went as she planned, that would change. The Zoo International deal had made waves. Word had spread fast across East Asian circles that OrbisTech's rising star had broken away and taken the crown jewel with her. But it wasn't just what Rebecca had taken. It was what she'd left behind. Silence. No press release. No scandal. No LinkedIn status update. Ghosting OrbisTech had been the loudest move she'd ever made. She walked into the lobby of the Conrad Centennial, heels clicking against the polished stone. At the concierge desk, she gave a name. The woman behind the counter's eyes widened, and she handed over a keycard in a black envelope without a word. Room 5503. Rebecca rode the elevator alone. As the doors closed, her reflection stared back at her. Calm, deliberate, unreadable. The old Rebecca might have felt fear. The new one felt calculated. The penthouse suite was cold, silent, and dimly lit. A single laptop sat open on the table. Next to it, a card. Please upload the file. No backups, no traces. Rebecca set down her bag, took out a slim USB drive, and hesitated. What she was about to do violated at least 3 international IP clauses and 2 NDAs. But those NDAs were tied to an employer that had ambushed her, embarrassed her, and discarded her. She plugged in the drive. The file Project Lantern was her baby, an AI-driven logistics optimization system that learned from regional traffic, weather, cultural holidays, and supply chain bottlenecks. In the wrong hands, it could undercut competitors for years, and that's why she'd encrypted it with a failsafe, a digital fingerprint. Anyone who used it without her activation key would find themselves locked out after 72 hours and flagged, uploading. Finished. She closed the laptop. Then she walked into the next room, where a man in a navy kurta stood by the window, sipping tea. His name was Armin Senerol, founder of Blue Crescent Ventures, VC mogul, billionaire, and more importantly, the man behind the sudden interest in her. "You're punctual," he said without turning. "I don't like waiting or being made to." Armin smiled. "So it's true then. You did walk out mid-negotiation and walk back in as your entity." "I walked out when I realized I'd built something too valuable for someone else to own." He turned to face her. "What do you want, Rebecca?" "Freedom, leverage, and the kind of capital that doesn't ask for my soul in return." He sat at the edge of the bed, steepling his fingers. "You want to launch your firm?" "I already have," she replied. "I just haven't told the world yet." Armin's smile widened. "I'll fund it. 50 million. No questions asked. In exchange, exclusive rights to the Lantern Protocol for 3 years." She shook her head. "You don't get exclusivity. You get first rights. I'm not replacing one leash with another." There was a pause, long and heavy. Then he nodded slowly. "You're dangerous. I've spent too long being underestimated." He leaned back. "Let's test how far that danger goes." Back in San Francisco, the fallout from Rebecca's move was swift and brutal. OrbisTech's legal department issued an internal memo, confirming her departure for personal reasons, but the timing raised flags. Investors weren't stupid. Connor Baines, now promoted to acting VP of Global Strategy, was flailing. The Zoo deal had stalled after Rebecca's exit. Rumors circulated that the integration clause Rebecca designed, now deleted from the draft, was key to regulatory approval. By week's end, OrbisTech's stock dropped 7. Connor summoned legal. "We need to know exactly what she took. Her personal belongings in a folder," the associate said nervously. "No data breaches detected. No files accessed after her resignation was processed." He slammed his hand on the table. "I don't believe that." "She's playing us, sir," the legal officer said carefully. "You fired her in front of the clients. She was under no obligation to give you her work." And that's when it hit him. Rebecca hadn't stolen anything. She'd owned it all along. Connor made one last desperate move. He reached out to Zoo International, requesting a status call. They declined. "Worse, Mr. Liang responded personally. Zoo International does not comment on terminated partnerships. Please direct future inquiries through proper diplomatic channels." Connor sat back in his chair. She'd outmaneuvered him, and now she was ghosting the industry and leaving him in the dark. Rebecca stared at the rain-slicked streets of Hong Kong through the tinted window of her hotel suite, the neon reflections smearing like paint across the glass. She had always found something soothing in the city's chaos, its relentless motion, the fusion of old-world formality and ruthless modern ambition. But tonight, she couldn't relax. Not with the flash drive sitting on her desk. It was unmarked, innocuous and deadly. The email had arrived earlier that day. No sender, no subject, just a line of text and a download link. Connor was never working alone. Time to play the long game. She hadn't clicked the link immediately. Years of navigating corporate espionage had taught her better. But she had a secure device, isolated from all networks. She downloaded the file, opened it, and what she found changed everything. Internal memos, secret boardroom recordings, a burner Gmail thread between Connor and, of all people, Jessica Stanton, OrbisTech's legal chief, and until 6 weeks ago, Rebecca's closest confidant. There were outlines of a plan to remove her, not just from the Zoo deal but from the industry itself. Smear tactics, undermining her visa sponsorships, blocking references. They had built an entire playbook to dismantle her career. And yet, it wasn't just vindication. It was ammunition. Her phone buzzed. A single message from her contact at Zoo Technologies. "We're ready. Come in tomorrow." And we go live. Rebecca slipped the flash drive into a padded envelope, addressed it to an investigative tech journalist in London, and sealed it with a single strip of red tape. She smiled for the first time in hours. The reckoning had begun. The news didn't break. It slithered at T7:03 am Singapore time. Nestled between oil prices and a pharmaceutical recall, the Straits Times dropped a 5-line business blurb. Zoo International has entered a strategic partnership with a Singapore-based boutique consultancy. Sources suggest the firm will oversee Asia-Pacific integration strategies moving forward. No names, no logos. But anyone who'd been watching closely, anyone who knew the shape of things, could hear the silence being shattered. By 9:15 am, 3 different OrbisTech client dashboards registered access from a new IP block, Rebecca's shell firm. A clean logo, a digital PO box, 1-page website. No press releases, no bios, no fingerprints. But the contracts had been signed. Zoo's procurement department had quietly cancelled every pending license renewal with OrbisTech. Their final message to Connor Baines came in a 7-word reply from COO Mr. Liang himself. "We're moving in a different direction." Connor tried to rally. He pulled together an emergency call with legal and PR, barking orders into a Bluetooth headset from the executive suite as if sheer volume could manifest control. "We need a counter-narrative, a statement, something to stop the bleeding." The bleeding was already internal. Slack channels turned into ghost towns. Senior staff pretended to be on lunch breaks. Mid-tier managers floated or some updates on LinkedIn. Behind vague status updates like "open to exploring new opportunities," one post simply read, "Does anyone know where Laura Beasley is?" She was the replacement for Rebecca, flown in from London. She spoke French fluently. Mandarin, not at all. She had sent 3 emails to Mr. Liang. None were opened. Across the South China Sea, Rebecca sat in a private booth of a rooftop bar in Jakarta, redlining an expansion agreement for Zeus Southeast Asia Partners. Lychee, martini in hand, a jazz cover of Smells Like Teen Spirit played softly in the background. Her assistant handed her an iPad. "There's been a new article," she said. Rebecca glanced at the screen. "Business Week" by Natalie Hang. Title: OrbisTech. In transition. What's behind the zoo disengagement? It was a soft piece. Measured. No direct accusations. Just context. Until halfway through, where the paragraph cracked open. Sources familiar with the negotiation confirmed that Zhu's new advisory partner includes former OrbisTech executive Rebecca Chang. Rebecca didn't blink. She sipped her drink. "Have they issued a response?" she asked. Her assistant shook her head. "Not yet. They will." By 4 p.m. in New York, OrbisTech stock had dipped 6%. Low volume but sharp enough to make traders uneasy. Connor paced the executive suite, drenched in sweat, screaming into his phone. "We need a statement. Deny everything. Frame it as a rogue contractor, or hell, make it look like she never worked here." But legal had stalled. PR had ghosted, and the board had started calling. Shareholder chats lit up with words like negligence, dereliction, and governance vacuum. That evening, Rebecca's phone rang. Private number. Old ringtone. She answered. "Rebecca. It's Martin. Martin Lee. Angel investor. Founding board member. The man who believed in her when she was still riding 1/0 slide decks and sleeping in airport lounges. I didn't expect to hear from you," she said calmly. "You always knew when to keep your powder dry," he replied. I respected that silence. Then, with the quiet gravity of a man who had seen too many balance sheets bleed out from ego, he said, "Can we meet?" She didn't ask why. Singapore or Hong Kong? Hong Kong. Quiet place. No reporters. "Tomorrow, I'll send the plane." The next morning, the ethics review team inside OrbisTech received a folder. No return address. Inside, a timeline, contracts, emails, a Slack export, screenshots, and one short memo. Rebecca Chang was never issued a formal non-compete. There was no NDA filed upon exit. This was acknowledged via email by Mr. Baines on date. OrbisTech HR audit log. Connor hadn't just burned a bridge, he'd set fire to his own foundation. That same evening in Hong Kong, Rebecca entered a discreet VIP entrance at the Mandarin Oriental. A staff member escorted her without a word through a private elevator to a penthouse suite reserved for dignitaries and billionaires who required more than privacy, they required invisibility. Martin Lee stood near the balcony, nursing a tumbler of Hibiki whiskey. Older now, slower too, but his mind remained sharper than most hedge fund analysts half his age. "You look tired," Rebecca said. He turned, smiling faintly. "I'm not the one who just ripped a global deal out from under a Fortune 100. She chuckled. "You always had a flair for drama." He motioned to the chair opposite. "Let's talk fallout." For the next 40 minutes, Rebecca laid out everything. Every whispered conversation. Every misstep Connor made. The way OrbisTech had stopped listening to her. To markets, to culture. "I didn't plan revenge," she said, meaning it. "I just stopped absorbing damage." Martin nodded thoughtfully. "And Zoo? I gave them something they never had. Translation, respect, and time." She sipped her tea. "Now they're returning the favor." Martin leaned forward. "Connor won't survive this." "He'll try. Narcissists always do." Martin paused. "Do you want him removed?" Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "I don't need to. He's erasing himself." Then she reached into her portfolio and slid a thick envelope across the table. Martin opened it. Inside were detailed whistleblower documents, signed and time-stamped. Procurement irregularities, a manipulated bonus structure, even forged ESG compliance reports. "This isn't revenge," Rebecca said quietly. "This is audit justice." Martin exhaled slowly. "The board will implode." "They already have," she said. "They just haven't admitted it yet." At that same hour in New York, Connor stared blankly at his monitor. His inbox was bleeding. Headlines now use his name, Connor Baines. Under fire for Asia-Pacific collapse. Where was OrbisTech's oversight? Internal documents leak raises ethics questions. His PR team quit en masse. His executive assistant went on medical leave. His CDO stopped replying. He tried texting his wife. No response. Connor stumbled toward the office wet bar, poured himself 3 fingers of scotch, and turned on the TV. A CNBC anchor was dissecting the OrbisTech fallout. Then, the camera cut to a video still of Rebecca standing next to Mr. Liang at a gala, Zoo's logo floating proudly behind them. He threw the glass at the screen. The screen shattered. So did he. 2 days after the Businessweek article dropped, OrbisTech's executive floor was an ecosystem of denial. Connor stormed through the 38th floor hallway like a ghost in a borrowed suit. Every conversation paused when he passed. Eyes darted. Slack messages exploded behind his back. But no one met. His gaze at T9:45 am. A full board meeting convened in Conference Room Delta, a space usually reserved for big wins and investor charm offensives. This time, it was triage. Martin Lee sat at the head of the table. Connor stood at the far end, sleeves rolled to the elbow. A color-printed timeline of miscommunication fanned out across the glossy wood like a poker hand. "I take full accountability," he said, voice trembling on the edge of control. "But let's not pretend one consultant's departure torpedoed an entire division." Martin held up a folder. "This isn't just about her departure. This is about how you handled it or didn't." He opened the folder. Inside were signed compliance audit requests from Rebecca, dating back months before her termination. "No NDA," Martin said. "No finalized non-compete. No formal offboarding. You left a door open, and she walked through it with precision." Connor flushed. "We had verbal agreements." Verbal? The general counsel leaned forward. "You dismissed the only person with strategic and cultural equity in our largest expansion, then tried to bury it under PowerPoint buzzwords." Another board member tapped their phone and looked up. "Our stock has dropped 18%, and Zoo isn't returning legals calls. We've lost 4 accounts since Monday." Connor snapped. "She's poaching." "No," Martin said. "She's outperforming." A silence. Heavy. Damning. Then Martin spoke again, slower. "She's agreed to testify next week. Voluntarily. No settlement requested." Connor staggered back half a step. You talked to her?" Martin's voice was clinical now. "You didn't just lose a consultant. You lost a person who knew how to speak to our clients. You fired the bridge and called it a strategy." The vote of no confidence came 36 hours later. Connor was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. A press release was drafted and redrafted 3 times before the PR team gave up and simply released a holding statement. But the damage was already metastasizing. Meanwhile, in Singapore, Rebecca Chang watched it unfold from the corner office of RC Global's temporary headquarters, a high-rise co-working suite with a panoramic view of Marina Bay. She didn't gloat. She didn't post. Instead, she met with the North American expansion team from Ju International. On the table between them was a contract that made the previous $180 million deal look like a prototype. Multi-region, multi-currency, no middleman, full strategic control delegated to her. When the final clause was read aloud, she scanned the document one last time, then signed, and as the pen left the page, a quiet power settled around her. Not victory, not vengeance, just truth. Rebecca stared at the monitor in her Singapore office, watching the live stream of OrbisTech's hastily arranged press conference. The company's interim CEO, Priya Deshmukh, read a carefully crafted statement, flanked by shaken executives. Connor's absence was conspicuous, his name unspoken but his shadow undeniable. "The board has accepted Mr. Baines' resignation, effective immediately," Priya announced. "We remain committed to the highest ethical standards and client relationships, particularly in emerging markets." A polite round of applause followed from an audience of stiff reporters and jittery investors. But Rebecca didn't clap. She simply closed the tab and swiveled in her chair, facing the whiteboard behind her. On it was a map of Southeast Asia, dotted with red and green markers. Some labeled legacy clients, others targets, and one, in bold blue ink, marked ARG Hub Jakarta, her new base of operations. The door clicked open, and Clarice stepped in. Rebecca's new operations chief, poached from one of OrbisTech's suppliers just a week prior. The tech stack's migrating clean, she said. Jew's legal team approved the NDA, and we've got soft commitments from 3 former OrbisTech clients. Names? Rebecca asked without looking up. Shenzhen Petrocane, Lumera Mobility, and Trackham. Rebecca's smile was subtle, calculated. And Connor? Clarice snorted. Burning bridges on LinkedIn. A post this morning said he was exploring fresh visioning opportunities, whatever that means. Rebecca's tone remained neutral, but her eyes flashed. He'll spin his fall into a pivot. They always do. But everyone knows now. Clarice said. Even the Financial Times called him the architect of his own collapse. Rebecca walked to the window and looked out over Marina Bay. That's the thing about architecture, she said. Sometimes it collapses on the people who thought they built it. She turned. Let's go in Jakarta. Connor sat in a hotel bar in Zurich, cradling a half-empty glass of something expensive and irrelevant. The phone buzzed beside him, calls from lawyers, voicemails from people trying to frame his downfall as a learning experience. He'd become a case study, a cautionary tale, but the bitterness wasn't about the loss. Not entirely. It was about her. He thought Rebecca would cry, or crumble, or disappear quietly like so many others he'd sidelined. Instead, she'd risen, higher, smarter, faster. He finished a drink and leaned back. He still didn't understand how she'd played him so cleanly, but maybe that was the point. Back in Singapore, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Rebecca walked the quiet floor of ARG Global. She passed new desks, new hires, a dozen small empires in the making. This wasn't about a single contract anymore. Not about revenge. It was about ownership. About rewriting the rules she had once been forced to follow. And she was just getting started. The rain came suddenly, drumming against the skylights of ARG Global's Jakarta office. Rebecca stood by the corner window, watching it flood the glass. Like liquid silver, her reflection shimmered calm, unreadable, but her mind moved in sharp, methodical loops. Behind her, the office buzzed. She had just wrapped a virtual call with Singapore's Energy Commission. They were onboarding with ARG. The Malaysian Transport Authority followed next. One after the other, OrbisTech's clients were defecting not because of loyalty, but because Rebecca offered something rarer: competence, clarity, integrity, and she never promised more than she could deliver. Clarice entered, tablet in hand. The leak just hit, she said. Rebecca turned, expression unchanged. Where? Reuters. NYT. Quartz picked it up secondhand. Whistleblower materials from an anonymous source. Procurement fraud. The falsified decompliance reports. Ghost invoices. All roads lead back to Connor and OrbisTech. Rebecca nodded once. They weren't lies, just time truths. Clarice hesitated. He's issuing a statement. Want to see? Rebecca considered, then shook her head. He'll say he takes responsibility while blaming systemic challenges, then he'll go on sabbatical. Bali, probably. Clarice chuckled. You know him too well. Rebecca didn't answer. She was already looking ahead. A modest gala, glass walls, quiet music. The Asia Women in Leadership Forum had never been especially flashy, just influential. The kind of place where movers moved in whispers. Rebecca was seated beside the Indonesian Minister for Digital Transformation. Across the room, tech journalists hovered, but kept their distance. She didn't need to chase headlines anymore. Her name was already in them. A young executive approached with a hesitant smile. Miss Chan? I just wanted to say, you're the reason I didn't walk away from this industry. Rebecca studied her. Young, eager, still soft around the edges. Good, Rebecca said gently. But make sure you're the reason you stay. The woman nodded, eyes shimmering, and slipped back into the crowd. Rebecca turned back toward the stage. The keynote speaker had just taken the podium, a former diplomat turned venture capitalist. But her words faded into background noise because Rebecca was thinking of something else. Something older. The first boardroom that ever silenced her. The whispered comment about being too emotional. The project stolen. The credit erased. The moment she realized that no one would hand her power, she'd have to build it, brick by brutal brick. And now, standing on her own foundation, she didn't feel victorious. She felt free in a bully calf. With suspiciously good Wi-Fi, Connor Baines was rewriting his personal narrative. He'd landed some podcast interviews, bought a Substack domain, hired a ghostwriter. He called it the Pivot series, part self-help, part leadership lessons. He didn't mention Rebecca once, because he couldn't, because everyone already knew. Arg. Global's headquarters sat 3 stories high, a minimalist temple of steel, glass, and precision. But in Rebecca's office, there were only 2 items of decoration: a framed contract, the zoo deal, and a small brass chess queen. It was the only piece on the board, because that's how she liked to play.